and I'm going to set it so that you guys can see the speaker. If you want to change that to see anything else, you can toggle through that in the top right-hand corner. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nick Pinizzato, our CEO of the National Deer Association, to give the organizational update. So Nick, floor is yours for the next couple of minutes. Let us know what's going on here at the Deer Association, what great things are happening.
You better know what's going on here, Matt. A lot of good stuff. Good to see everybody. I was looking at myself on the video here and I see bags under my eyes, and I'm sure I'm not the only punch drunk person on the show tonight from turkey hunting. And I know I was made a fool of this morning by a turkey. And so I'm also in a bit of a grumpy mood and I'm really mad at turkey. So I'm guessing I'm not the only one. Mention it in the chat if you also sort of fit that bill. So anyway, yeah, I want to give you a quick organizational update here. There's a ton going on, and we want to get to our special guests here this evening who you're here to see. So thank you again for being here. We really enjoy doing these, and we all learn something every single time. I'm sure you will as well. So let's go ahead and get to it. The education and outreach. For the first time ever, the Deer Steward Hunting Property Evaluation Module, and this is brought to you by our friends at Onyx. It'll happen early next month in Northern Missouri with tonight's guest as the host. So if you like what you hear here tonight, we encourage you to sign up. There's still room. Speaking of Deer Steward, all Deer Steward online classes have been discounted for over a year now because of COVID. Those prices are going to return to normal. We mentioned this last time as well, between now and the next Beer and Deer webinar. So that'll be June 4th. It'll be the last day to save. So if you're on the fence, make sure you take advantage of that discount. Our NDA Mission Survey is going to go out very soon, the week of May 17th. The incentive prize to participate in that is a lifetime Onyx Map membership. And those of you that use Onyx, like myself, I start to wonder how I ever hunted without it. It's just such a valuable tool. So a lifetime membership is a really, really awesome prize. So help us by filling out that survey, and you never know, you might be the person to take that prize home. Our hunter recruitment, retention, and reactivation, what we call R3, a lot of good things going on there. Our Field to Fork events continue to grow with more on the books this fall than in the pre-pandemic, including some really neat models and partnerships. If you're interested in starting a Field to Fork or helping with one, contact Hank Forrester. Hank is here on the, you can hit him up on the chat directly, but you can also get him at hank@deerassociation.com. Incidentally, if you want to get a hold of any of us on email, it's simply our first name at deerassociation.com. All hate mail should go to Matt Ross, however. I want to point that out. Our Deer Hunting 101 courses, sales continue strong into 2021, and we'll be adding some free modern learn to hunt resources to our current offerings by this hunting season. Our Habitat Committee also has finalized a multi-year management plan for the Back 40 property. If you'll recall, that was a donation to us from our friends at Meat Eater. Earlier this year. The work has already begun, spraying and seeding a few parts of the property. And so we'll recap the progress in the next issue of Quality Whitetails. On the policy front, we have a lot going on, local, state, and federal at all levels. The America the Beautiful report was recently released. It outlines a locally led and voluntary nationwide conservation goal to conserve 30% of the U.S. lands and waters by 2030, which is an extremely ambitious goal, but you have to start somewhere. We like to set the bar high. NDA has been involved with this initiative for a while now, and other recommendations made by NDA and other organizations are in that report. So we have actually had influence on that report. We'll continue to ensure that hunters have a seat at the table as this initiative moves forward. So get our newsletter. If you don't already, you can sign up free on the website. And you're going to get our policy updates. And Torrin Miller, our policy guy, he's probably on here tonight. He puts the updates out there, keeps you up to date on what's going on in your backyard, but also on the federal end of things. So check that out. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recently proposed to add or expand hunting and fishing opportunities for game across 2.1 million acres at 90 national wildlife refuges. So that's a really big deal. We're involved with that. The proposal would open or expand 939 opportunities for hunting or sport fishing across the country, opening acreage about 1.5 times the size of the state of Delaware. So that's awesome. If you're a deer hunter, you rely on public land, that's great news for you. And there's a public comment period that's open right now. We're also advocating in support of 3 major federal conservation bills that were recently introduced. The Recovering America's Wildlife Act, referred to as RAWA, you may have heard that, the Outdoor Restoration Partnership Act, and the Trillion Trees Act, all very good conservation programs. They'll recover and maintain healthy fish and wildlife populations, ensure our forests are actively managed to increase wildlife habitat and reduce risk of wildfires, and all ultimately result in the reforestation of vast swaths of our public lands, aiding in the lessening impacts of climate change. So these are big conservation initiatives that we're involved with. On a state level, in our friends in New York, we usually have a pretty good representation from New York here on the show. Our youth deer hunting pilot program initiative is up and running, and individual counties in New York must pass a local law authorizing participation in the pilot program. So yes, New York is a little bit behind most states. They're a lot behind most states, frankly, when it comes to youth hunting and getting youth involved, but this is at least a step in the right direction. A pre-written letter and county contact information can be found on our website if you're in New York and you want to do this, or you can email Torin at torin@deerassociation.com and he'll be sure to hook you up there. And then our latest chronic wasting disease roundup is on our website as well. It provides all the latest updates on CWD spread and other news across the country, so be sure to check that out. And finally, I'll close with our grassroots work. So our branch leadership meeting was held on April 13th. It included updates on policy and advocacy issues that we've been engaged with on the first quarter, many of which you just heard about. The Reads website is now up and running for our branches to place orders for all their fundraising needs. Again, that's a great opportunity, folks. You can pick out what you want to have in your package if you're doing a banquet, if you're doing a small raffle, whatever. Definitely check out the Reads website and make it easy on yourself. We've got a great partnership with them. We also continue to expand our preferred vendor program for our branches. So a lot of great companies coming on board to get really good products in front of your folks that help us fundraise. And finally, we have a new branch to announce in Peoria, Illinois. It'll be the Peoria area branch. So we'd like to welcome them aboard as well. And finally, and by the next show, maybe, we recently just hired a new chief development officer. We'll introduce her hopefully at the next Beer and Deer webinar. So we're excited to have that done as well. So a lot going on. Apologize for being a little bit lengthy here. So enough for me. Let's sit back and enjoy the show. Back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Nick. And that's right. For those that want to send those complaints to me, there's just one T in Matt, M-A-T at Deer. So no, I'm just kidding. All right. So feature presentation. I got my Land and Legacy hat on here, which is pretty sharp. This hat was actually featured where if you purchase it, I don't know if they're still doing the deal. Yeah. They give a donation to the Deer Association, which is beautiful. So we have our gentleman from Land and Legacy. We have Adam Keith, and actually see Matt was able to join us from an airport. Adam Keith is originally from the Ozark Mountains of Missouri. His partner, Matt Dye, is a Virginia native. Together they are Land and Legacy, and they actually received our 2020 Al Brothers Professional Deer Managers of the Year Award, a very prestigious honor. They work on dozens and dozens of properties across the country. In fact, that's why Matt is traveling today. We have been on several of the properties that they've managed, and they do outstanding work, holistic, comprehensive deer and wildlife management. Through their consultation business, Land and Legacy is devoted to providing an effective assessment of every property they go on, the natural resources there, no matter its size or location. And they specialize in design, layout, and improvement of a property's natural resources for the overall achievement of your goals, the landowner, making sure it's in line with ecological integrity and the surrounding native landscape. And so today, the presentation we have, Adam is going to provide us. Adam, go ahead and turn off your mute and start sharing your screen. Is about old field management. What's out there for fawns, does, and bucks? What should we be thinking about outside of the scope of food plots and forest management, which we've talked about on this webinar, but what's going on in those early successional areas or old field areas that are for deer? So Adam, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Matt. I will go ahead and get that started. And here we go. So you guys on the Zoom. I've got to kind of rearrange you here so I can actually get this thing going. You're blocking everything. Here we go. So, all right, drag you guys back up to the top. So we've got old field management, and I think this is something that's came along. I'll point a big finger at a good finger, I guess, at Dr. Craig Harper and in a lot of his research really highlighting this. But I think as we get through this presentation, Matt, give me a thumbs up. Everything good? Perfect. All right. As we go through this presentation, you'll learn it's not just about fields and the old field. We'll try to define it. And we'll explain how to manage it and how to restore an old field, if you will. So here we go. I'm just going to have to hide you guys completely. There we go. So make sure I'm going right. All right. So common tendencies with landowners that we see. As you mentioned, Matt, we are a consulting company. We've now been, I leave this month to hit New York. And so we will go from New York to Texas, from Florida to North Dakota, and every state in between. So it's about 30 states, I believe, in 4 years since we've been Land and Legacy, this company, and about 80,000+ acres we've worked. And a common trend that we see with open areas, whether it's an old field, crop field, I'll just say it's not mature timber, is let's make it a food plot. And that's just so common. And honestly, it's pretty frustrating sometimes, because as you dissect a property and you start trying to lay out the architecture of it and figuring out access and bedding and food, just because it's an open area doesn't mean it needs to be a food plot. And I think one of the beautiful things about old fields is we can create a native food plot, if you will, that provides just as good a benefit from the food standpoint, but leaps and bounds better from a cover standpoint. And it doesn't cost us hardly anything in comparison to food plots. So let's make it a food plot. Not every opening should be a food plot. And I just explained why that could be. I've seen too many old fields that are just beautiful with diverse natives, blooming flowers, clump grass scattered through, mix of saplings or shrubs creeping in, and they get bush hogged under and planted in a food plot that probably didn't even get fertilizer. And so I think it's very important for landowners to understand how to maximize each and every acre. And so many times you see a food plot go in that's mediocre when what was there was maximized old field that so many more wildlife can benefit from. So old fields rank very high on our list of attractiveness and benefits and need on properties. So a lot of things that really come into play when you compare food plots to old fields too, before we start getting through it, I want to address is that 9 out of the 10 species that are planted in food plots are non-native species. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they're non-native, so they're not adapted to those soils. So typically, if you're trying to promote them, you're going to need to do soil amendments, liming and fertilizing to get maximum potential out of them. But if you're using old fields or native plants, a lot of those are adapted to our soils and don't need those soil amendments to thrive. And quite frankly, a lot of them won't do as well if they are getting heavily fertilized. So compare that whenever you're looking at these areas. If you've got an area that's not mature timber, but it's not a food plot, before you dare touch it with a plow or a herbicide sprayer, look at it, try to learn the species that are there. And if you educate yourself and learn the plants that are there, you might find that, whoa, I've got something really special here, and I dare not do anything detrimental to change this for a long haul. Now, of course, there are things you need to do to promote it and keep it very productive. And we'll talk about that as we get into disturbances. So here we go. What is an old field? First and foremost, properly managed old field is not neglected nor simply an abandoned field. Now, we see a lot of, quote, old fields that are just naturally occurring. They weren't planted, they weren't utilized or trying to be turned into old field. They just are naturally occurring. But a lot of times you see those naturally occurring old fields that are 2, 5, or even 10 years past peak potential because they weren't getting maintained. And so if you're trying to envision an old field that's really productive, I try to say it's within that 1 to 6 year window, depending on the species, depending on the location in the world. The classic example, it all depends, but 1 to 7 years post major disturbance. So 1 to 7 years post being converted from a cattle field, or 1 to 7 years post crop ground. I know that's a large window of time, but it really just depends on the seed bank, the climate, and the region that you're at. So an old field, I think of I struggle with the term old field a lot, because old, you automatically kind of probably have a negative kickback when you say old. It's an old field by name, but it's everything but old. It's kind of like that Chris Young song, "An Old Love Feels New." It's kind of like an old field feels new, because it's not crop, it's not food plot, and it's not just grown up rank and invasive species that's been unmanaged for 20 years. And so a true old field is highly managed, diverse collection of native plant communities. That's got a lot of forbs, it's got a lot of grasses, it's got some shrubs, and it probably has some woody saplings. If you transition and you have more shrubs or more woody saplings, then we'll start talking about young forests. But we're talking about old field, which has a lot of forbs, typically more forbs than grasses, is my personal preference. So who benefits from old fields? Well, it kind of all depends. Once again, we're going back to that old answer. It depends. Food value, and I will point once again, some of the great research done by some of these universities that are focused so much on habitat and land management research. But some of the great research by Dr. Craig Harper, University of Tennessee, has found that food values 3,000 to 3,500 pounds of digestible forage per acre annually in old fields that are managed appropriately. Now, if you look at some of his other research where they found typical pounds produced on food plots, that can range from anywhere from 3,000 to about 6,000. And I think if we're all being honest, we'll know that a lot of our food plots aren't maxed out. The soil's not being amended correctly. Invasive species aren't being controlled. Weeds aren't being controlled appropriately. They're planted in bad locations where their drainage is bad. So a lot of things leading to not peak production in food plots. And I love food plots, but I think we can all look in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm probably not the best food plot manager in the world on every one of my food plots. I may have some really good ones, but there are some very bad ones out there. So if you have mediocre food plots, they probably don't compete with a maximized, fully managed old field. So fawns, if we're speaking about fawns typically during that first 6 months of their life, they need, and this is some research that was published in QDMA's magazine, about 18% crude protein. Lactating does need anywhere from 16 to 18% crude protein. And the bucks growing antlers are about 15 to 17% crude protein needed. And this is that time frame, well, when antlers are growing and fawns are on the ground. So that late spring all the way through mid to late summer. And so we're looking for plants that provide at least 15% crude protein or more, that frankly are very abundant. And if you look at food plots, I don't know how many times I said this, and I'll probably say this till I'm laying on my deathbed, trying to get people to understand the ratio of food plot acres to total acres. I don't know if I've seen, but maybe over 5%, but it's very, very low where I've found landowners that have more than 5% of their property in food plots. 9 times out of 10, it's less than 5%. So it takes a lot of forage on 5% or less to provide food for the entire deer herd and other wildlife. So old fields can really help fill that gap and provide just a ton of forage available. Cover value on old fields, well, this is where we'll get into disturbance. But the first few years after a disturbance, it's great fawning cover. And particularly a disturbance that I'm talking about is either strip disking, but my favorite, prescribed fire. If you've burned it, if anybody's ever conducted a prescribed fire, they know that it takes a few years to grow back to that thick, rank, nasty area that you had before the fire. So the first few years after the fire, if you're doing a 2 to 5 year burn cycle, you're going to have great fawning cover. Lots of forbs. The woody saplings or the shrubs are set back. There's some bare ground or areas where fawns can navigate through, can lay down. There's plenty of young, tender forage available, but there's not thick, tall, rank grass that's hard to navigate through. But 2 to 3 years leading up to the next disturbance, so you go the first couple of years or 3 years post-fire, it's really nice fawning cover. But then you get into that 3, 4, 5 year post-fire, you're going to have a lot better bedding cover in the fall and winter. So you've got probably more woody structure, more saplings. The grass is probably getting a little thicker in areas. It's not as many forbs, but there's still forbs for some food, but it's better woody browse during the winter months. The vegetation stays standing throughout the fall and winter better. And so it's just overall, it's better cover during hunting season, because I think that's what a lot of us are talking about. Well, how's it look during hunting season? And I'm going to shift it back and say those first few years post-fire, when you're looking from a cover standpoint, if you have a heavy forb base and scattered clumps of bunch grass or native grass and a few shrubs, you're going to probably notice that during the fall, it's not as good cover, because the wind, the rain, the ice, the snow, it beats those forbs down, and they can't withstand that winter elements like woody saplings, shrubs, or dense stands of native grass. So if you're trying to manage appropriately, you have to consider that in the cycle of disturbance of going, this year or these next few years, this part of the farm may be better fawning cover, while the other part of the farm may be better cover during hunting season. I think it's wrong of me to be invited on this podcast. I say it too often because we're always doing podcasts, but invited on this beer and deer presentation. It's almost like being invited to a Bible study and not referencing the Bible. I'm going to reference Dr. Craig Harper's Wildlife Food Plots and Early Successional Plants book that I'm sure is somewhere on QDMA. But the research that they've conducted is it's just so amazing. It's so great. And so I want to show the comparison here in some of our popular food plot varieties, and then also some very common forbs that you may find in old fields. Now think back to the slide a couple slides ago where we talked about crude protein needed from bucks growing antlers, from fawns and lactating does, that about 15 or above is preferred, at least 15. And you can see soybeans, obviously crude protein, even though it got cut off in this picture, about 33% crude protein. Well, that's pretty doggone good, but you have to pay for it. You have to amend the soil correctly. It's not naturally occurring, so it's really good. But if you're paying for it, doggone it, it better be good. And then you can go to some of the other common ones, lab, red ripper peas, iron clay peas. They're 25 through 29. So all of these, and American joint vetch, they're all above 15. But if you look over at some of our old fields, pokeweed is 32. Old field acer, which I've got a bunch of it, 30%, or 23%, sorry. Wild lettuce, 21%. All it has to do is be above 15. And partridge pea, all of these common ragweed is 17%. I think it's my all-time favorite, All-American. Take it to the bank. It's amazing. Common ragweed. and it's 17.8%. And all the plants you see on the right side, unless they're just not there and you have to go and buy the seed, are going to be found throughout much of the range of whitetail deer. And that right there to me says about everything you need to see, and the fact of I should really, really try to promote these plants, these native plants on my property, because I shouldn't have to pay for them. They should already be there. So if you're looking at your property going, 3% is food plots, well, that 3% probably costs me the most. That probably takes the most out of my annual budget for the farm. But maybe I can get 15 to 20% in an old field, a managed old field, and have 3 to 3,500 pounds of forage available, where my food plots may have 4,000. You can quickly do some math. Most of you can. I won't be able to, but you can do some math and say, wow, this is really, really turning this property around. I've got food, and now I've got food that also equals cover in areas that, in comparison, my food plot just can't do it. So types of disturbance for old fields, the ones that we like most, prescribed fire. Man, it's just fun. It's native. It's natural. It's really just a great thing to have. I'm aware that some states can't use it as readily as we can here in Missouri, but if you can, it's just a tool that should be used on most properties. You can use disking to promote forbs. We'll talk a little bit about using disking in areas that are thick grass, where you can't, where it's just too thick and you're trying to promote more forbs. Disking is a great one. I don't kick me off here yet, Matt, but hear me out. Another great disturbance that's a natural one is cattle grazing. Growing up on a cattle farm, I just can't get through this without mentioning the fact that it's a good disturbance to have. Don't abuse it. Most people abuse it, and that's why we all learn to probably hate it. But cattle grazing is another disturbance that you can utilize in these old fields. I certainly do. So, and then a mechanical, which I almost cringe to say mowing, because everybody thinks of bush hogging, but you can use mowing, especially if woody saplings are getting too rank and you just can't control them with a fire. You can use grinder head on a skid steer. And then obviously another disturbance would be herbicide use, in particular with large areas of grass or invasive species that we're trying to control. But I don't know what you think of that big fire. That's actually a glade restoration, but I needed a good wow factor. So there you go with a prescribed fire on a glade. It's unfair for me to just talk so much about deer. So other species who benefit from old fields, if managed appropriately, rodents, that's a whole nother topic on predators and managing the property in a holistic manner. Cottontail rabbits, bobwhite quail, wild turkeys, and they certainly need it right now. Pollinators, and all kinds of birds, from grassland birds, woodland birds. We've seen all sorts using these managed old fields. So just a long list of things that can benefit from old fields. Food plots versus old fields. And this really comes into the comparison of fawns, antlers developing, and lactating does. Think about the spring green up timing in your area. For us here in southern Missouri, it starts greening up sometime in March. Soybeans don't go in the ground. Well, they never go in the ground around here in the Ozarks unless it's a food plot. But in northern Missouri, they're going in the ground sometime, probably at the earliest I've seen them, early May. A lot of times mid-May. Now, if you're thinking about white-tailed deer growing antlers, you know that there's probably a buck is focused on growing antlers long before mid-May. He's probably already growing antlers long before May. I know they are certainly in southern Missouri. I had pictures of them already in mid-April with little bitty nubs growing up. So if they're waiting on soybeans to grow, they're going to have to, they're already behind the 8 ball when it comes to growing antlers, because they were waiting so long. Now, I took this picture on the right. It was May 24th. And this was about 2 to 3 days post planting, I think, or it was within the week. They shot out of the ground, and then a massive flood came through. And I just needed to show the fact that this is towards the latter part of May, and soybeans are just starting to grow in our food plot. So spring green up timing, late spring, early summer for annual fall food plots. And that's the one thing, if you're trying to supplement with fall food plots, you can help the deer out by providing some forage. Once again, you're paying for it. You've got to buy the seed, you've got to amend the soil, you've got to have the time to get those in the ground. So if you are planting turnips and radishes and annual clovers and the grains like wheat, oats, cereal, rye, triticale, all those are growing right through the fall, kind of standing still during the winter, and then they start jumping in the spring or late winter when it starts warming up. Well, same thing's happening with our native vegetation in old fields. I know during turkey season, Nick was talking about that beforehand. We were doing the same thing down here, and we were already finding pokeweed or pokeberry, whatever you want to call it, about 8 inches tall around our food plots. And guess what? Our food plots aren't planted yet. So they're already off to the races because they were made for this. They're a native species. These cool snaps, warm spells, it's nothing out of the ordinary for our native species for the most part. If you're planting, think about the timing from your spring plantings, soybeans, clay peas. Like I said, they're going in the ground long after antlers are already growing. And that doe, she's already thinking about, she's carrying that fawn and she's getting ready to give birth. If they're having to wait for your food plots to be in the ground, germinate, and start growing, it's going to be a difficult year for that deer. So once again, the big comparison, free seeds versus hundreds of dollars annually. 3 E's, economical, efficient, and effective. That's a good one, Matt. Matt Dye made this slide, and there he goes, the 3 E's. So once again, I love food plots, but in the grand scheme of things, we really need to think about the importance of managing old fields, promoting native species, especially the early successional plant communities, to help offset our food plots. And if you get down and punch some numbers and look at total acreage, you'll probably find that you can provide way more food from native plants than you can in your food plots. So we'll look at it annually from a cover standpoint. Old fields provide fawning cover. Depending on the disturbance, it may be better for fawns or it may be better for fall and winter bedding, but it's still cover, and it's still really good cover depending on the timing of that disturbance. Food plots, little to no benefit on cover standpoint. You might have the occasional bedding in tall summer blends or corn, but food plots are typically planted for food, not cover. So even if you plant a food plot, you probably don't find it ideal that they're bedding in it and they're using it as cover. And one side note, if your food plots are providing the best cover in the neighborhood to where deer are wanting to bed there, get a chainsaw, get a herbicide tank, do something, because if that's the best cover you can provide, we are way out of balance and we need to do something drastically to help your deer herd. How do you create old fields? That's the big question. Hopefully by now I pumped you up enough and you're chomping at the bit to go create an old field. So how do you do it? And it's not just turn the switch off and say, well, that field over there, it was food plotting out last year, now it's old field. It may take some time to develop a highly diverse managed old field, but it's probably not as long as you might think. Consider the phrase addition by subtraction to begin understanding how to create old fields. So many times, some of the best old fields that we work with on clients is already trying to be there. We just have to subtract one species or one plant community that is dominating that area. And one of those most commonly occurring is some sort of cool season grass. It could be tall fescue, it could be smooth brome, it could be orchard grass. depending on where you're at, and I'll get to you guys down south, don't worry, but the guys in the Midwest and North, it's probably going to be some sort of cool season turf grass or cool season grass like smooth brome, Southern Iowa, all through Iowa, even Minnesota, Michigan. Smooth brome is just so abundant. Ohio, Indiana. If you go through Midwest Kentucky, Missouri, Illinois, it might be tall fescue. But these cool season non-natives are dominating much of our landscape, especially our old fields, or what could be very, very awesome old fields. If you're down south, it's most likely a warm season grass that's dominating, because you guys have such a long growing season. A lot of these pastures have been converted to warm seasons like Bermuda or Bahia. And when it comes to those, it's a little bit different timing in spraying, but the base or the most common practice is remove them. Just get rid of them. Spray them with a herbicide. Disking doesn't normally do it. Plowing won't do it. It needs to really be herbicide. As much as we hate herbicide use, and it seems like in this day and age, everybody's starting to hate on herbicide, but it's needed to help promote these healthy, native, diverse plant communities. So if you have fescue, orchard grass, or smooth brome, you can start your process of getting a very diverse managed old field by spraying with just a glyphosate, 2 quarts per acre. If you're using a big herbicide sprayer, or you can do, if it's a smaller area and you're doing it in a backpack sprayer, follow label instructions, but anywhere from a 3 to 4% solution of glyphosate in a tank of water to kill that fescue, orchard grass, or smooth brome. The best time to kill it is after a first good hard frost in the fall, or after a couple of frosts in the fall, which for my area is somewhere around the beginning of November. And that's where a lot of guys don't want to get into managing old fields, converting old fields the first week of November. So another time that works, it's probably not as good, but it's still pretty good, is that early spring when those cool season grasses start to bolt and the natives are still mostly dormant. There might be a little smidgen of collateral damage, but what's best for the species isn't always what's best for the individual. So if you do have a little bit of collateral damage on some species, it's fine. It will recover, but getting rid of that turf grass or that non-native grass that is dominating the area is a must. If you do it in the spring or in the fall, but I like it in the spring more because sometimes you don't get it as an effective a kill because those plants are growing so much in early spring that it might be best, or it is best, to return with a fire about a month later. The spots you did miss, or the spots that didn't really get fully killed, are starting to try to green back up, and you can hit them with a fire and really, really knock it back and open up that seed bank for natives to bolt and hopefully get a stronghold to where you can put that cool season grass behind you. I can't tell you how many old fields that I see where, you can try to summarize. Most of the time we answer with it depends, but so many old fields get dominated with some sort of pasture grass. And a lot of us deer hunters, if we bought farm ground for deer hunting, it's got some sort of old pasture aspect to it. So removing those grasses will be a great start. There you go. For some of you guys wondering why in the world a guy is doing this outside in town, it's because I didn't think you would want to hear the constant knocking of a 2-year-old going, Daddy, what's going on? Daddy, come out here. What you doing? So here we are outside. This is a really cool one for us. This is one of the properties that we manage and that we help manage in Ohio, before and after transformations. If you look at the picture on the left, you can see a great amount of eastern red cedar coming through. You see a lot of goldenrod. You see some blackberry mixed in. There's probably some milkweed mixed in. But that looks pretty good, right? It does. But once a burn was implemented, of course, we set back the cedars. But if you notice, there's still a good amount of cool season turf grass coming into this area. And all that green in the middle picture is a non-native cool season grass that's tall fescue. So if you look at the thing on the picture on the left, you say, well, that's really good. Is that what we're going for? Almost. We got to get rid of that cool season grass, or it's constantly fighting and a lot more work involved. It's like rust on a pickup. If you just keep scrubbing the rust off and you don't apply another coat of paint to take care of it to where it's not exposed metal, it's just going to keep coming back. So you have to get rid of it. So you can, that's why it's important. And I like managing with fire and herbicide to really get off to the races to where you can have a successful old field. In regards to this area, the one thing to keep in mind when you're following up herbicide and fire is if you burn to try to set back and clean the plate and return with herbicide, you're probably going to have more collateral damage on some natives because you have exposed soil. The soil warms up a little bit more and you're going to have germination of some of your native species, particularly goldenrod. It's not all bad, but ideally you burn and spray, burn it in the spring and spray in the fall, because what we're trying to do is expose that cool season grass and not have tall natives or tall thatch above it. So keep that in mind. You're not really, another thing you can do is use a grass specific herbicide, but you really just need to monitor what plants are coming up. The middle picture and the right picture, if all it is a cool season turf grass by tall fescue, you're fine just to go ahead and spray it with glyphosate. But if you notice there's a lot of other stuff coming up, particularly broadleaves, you may want to use a grass specific herbicide to kill that tall fescue. I'm going to go through some before and afters because I've lost track of time, but we've got several pictures here. I'm just going to share how many times I see this picture on the left. I see a little bit of, in this case, broom sedge coming up, but I see tall fescue mixed in. If I'm a turkey poult, I might as well just go ahead and croak over dead because I'm not going to survive in that kind of landscape. If I'm a deer, I'm pretty hungry. If I'm a fawn, the odds aren't in my favor. But if I look at the picture on the right, I see a lot of diverse native species. I see a lot of bunchy bunch grass. I see some bunch type forbs. I see some flowering plants, but even still, I see a little bit of Timothy, another cool season that I don't see as much. That's why it wasn't listed before, but it goes in the same category as tall fescue and smooth brome. So there's still some management that can occur on the right side. But if you look at the right compared to the left, this is just night and day difference. And if I'm a deer, I know which one I'm choosing to live on. Once again, another picture for you. How many times you see an old field or an area that's just the only management that goes on is mowing. That drives me nuts. I see it so many times to where just some glyphosate at the right time of the year, maybe a little bit of disking if I have to, and I can have what I've got on the right side. Just a beautiful old field, goldenrod, all kinds of other things. A lot of these pictures were taken in late summer, if you can't tell by the goldenrod, but you've got some shrubs coming in, some saplings coming in, diverse amount of forbs, and just beautiful. All that happened to make this transition happen was a one or two treatment of herbicide followed with some fire. That's it. I can't tell you how little time it's going to take. An afternoon with the earbuds in your ear, listen to some music, driving the UTV, spraying herbicide on cool season grass. Sounds like fun to me. And then follow it with a fire and it's even more fun. Another transition from an area that had a base of cool season grass. Very little forage value here. Look at the tree on the area on the right. Boy, that cardinal's singing loud above me, but you've got great goldenrod coming up. If you're thinking about this from a deer, I see food on the right side and very little food on the left side. If I'm thinking about it from a turkey standpoint, I see very little nesting cover on the left side, very little brood rearing habitat on the left side, and a lot better on the right side. Now, you can see there's a difference because there's leaves on the trees on the right side and not on the left side. But there's still a base of cool season grass that's not going to attract a lot of food or attract a lot of food for turkeys. It's not going to provide a lot of food for deer, and certainly not going to provide great cover. This right side is much more of that fawning type cover that we talked about post fire, post disturbance. Couple years of the right picture, as this grows up, it's going to get a little more rank. It's going to have a little bit more of a grass component, probably get some woody saplings creeping in or shrubs. Then we're going to hit it with a fire and set it back to a much more conducive landscape for fawning cover. Another before and after. I mean, the list is endless on before and afters of seeing acres covered with some sort of turf grass or Bahia, Bermuda, tall fescue, smooth brome, goes on and on. It's just, you've seen it 1,000 times, it seems like, but you see it. It's no food, no cover on the left. Go to the right side. It's great food. This is right on the edge of one of the food plots in Ohio, I believe. We've got a little bit of blue mist flower, goldenrod. There's some native grasses further back there. And so you've got food during the early spring, food during the summer, and then transition into more cover during the fall. I would like to see more woody saplings or shrubs on the right side if I'm going for fall or winter cover. So how do you manage old fields? Once again, you got to use disturbance, fire, growing or dormant season to guide the plant communities. What we mean by that is if you have just a lot of native grass like you see on the right side, you could honestly say this right side is prairie, not necessarily old field. The thing about this, that's when you need a growing season fire or some disking during the dormant season to promote more forbs. If you look at the picture on the left, that's a growing season fire. There's leaves all over the trees. So this area, we caught a hot September. It was very dry. We're not going to sing the blues that we're in the middle of a drought. We're going to use the drought to our advantage to improve habitat. And in this case, promote more forbs and set back some woody saplings. Another thing, like I mentioned, how to manage. There's a lot of like common errors that happen in old fields. One of them is not managing the old field foundation or the cool season grass foundation that's pretty well got its hands around the neck of the area. So you need to remove the cool season grass. The other one is not managing the grasses, in particularly native grasses like Indian grass or little blue stem or big blue stem. They get too dominating, or switchgrass too is another common one. They get too, they take over the area and get too thick. So you need to manage that just as much as removing the cool season grass. And you do that by, you can do it with mowing just to set back the thatch layer and then running the disc through it. Or my favorite would be to burn this area during January or February, early March, and then lightly disking it. And then another way to manage it was spot spraying herbicide to target the plants we don't want, target the invasives that have crept in, whatever it may be. We can just, once we've done our initial blanket spraying, we need to return with spot spraying just to make sure we don't let some sort of invasive creep in. No mowing. Forget the recreational mowing. We really try to avoid bush hogging anywhere other than trails. Sometimes guys will want to use mowing to, say, controlling woody saplings. But if you've got saplings small enough to run over with a bush hog, you've got saplings small enough you can set them back with fire. So the only rare instance where I'd say mowing is okay is to say if you can't mow in your state and you need to do something to set back that vegetation so you can start disking. I'm going to use these next few pictures are an area. So many times, like I said earlier, old fields are thought of as they need to be fields. They need to be great big areas, but they can be simple little openings in the edge of your timber, or simple little openings or a little cove at the edge of your food plot. The trees are too thick for a food plot to really grow. There's too much competition, but you can manage them as old fields, or use the same practices that we use in old fields to promote a diverse ecosystem or diverse landscape. And you can see this one right here. You can see Eastern Gamagrass coming up, looks beautiful. This was like 2 days ago or a day ago when this picture was taken. We cut out the junk trees that were really too thick. You can see a cedar on the right side. But what do you see? Even on my own farm, I'm guilty of this as well. I see in between the cedar and the Eastern Gamagrass right in the center, I see tall fescue coming in. So he's on my list, and he's going to go this next fall or spring. This is just a few feet away. All the blue circled areas are shrubs that were coming in. I don't know where they came from, but they're there. And so this is a few weeks or a month and a half removed fire. So it's not going to see a fire again for probably another 2, 3, 4 years. So that's going to give these saplings or these shrubs enough time to start growing. And we may set a few back on the next fire, but we're really going to try to promote some shrub colonies on this landscape to provide cover, woody browse, and just be overall better structure and diversified landscape. Rule of thumb, cut, spray, burn, repeat. I don't know how many times I say that. It's just, oh, well, whatever's there. If there's a bunch of trees, we probably need to cut some. We probably need to spray some invasives or spray some grass, try to burn it, and repeat it. It's a good rule of thumb to live by when it comes to land management. Questions? I will say before I jump in, this is something that I see far too often. A picture on the right side, you see smooth brome and honey locust. This is actually in central Kansas, so some guys won't relate, but how much better could that area be with simple herbicide treatment, cut the locust, promote some shrubs? I can hear the Bob White singing already.
Very good. Thanks, Adam. That was fantastic. I stopped the sharing, and we got some time for some questions. And it looks like Kip Adams has joined us. Welcome, Kip. I'm going to just go right into the Q&A feature and start reading. There's a bunch in there. I don't know if we have time to go through all these, but we're going to pick through a couple of them, and I'll start at the top. Does that sound good, Adam?
Yeah.
Good. And folks, don't jump off. Don't forget, we got a good prize. And actually, I'm up in the game here, and I'm going to give a different prize than I originally thought based on some of the presentations. So don't go away. All right, we got a question from Robert. What are the best species to look for shrubs and forbs in high snow country, such as northern Wisconsin? So thinking about places that are dealing with snow and maybe structure, what pops in your mind?
Yes. So I'm looking, obviously you want species that can withstand the snow, but also you want to find some that can they know the climate. So nannyberry is a common shrub I see up there. Red osier dogwood has got to rank right there in our top 3. Any of the plum varieties, and then the dogwood varieties, whether it be some sort of rough leaf dogwood, silky dogwood, flowering dogwood, if it's really native to your area, any of those species. And I encourage all my landowners to look at the state agency to see what ones they're growing in their nursery, if they have it, and that way it's easily available. Forbs just aren't made to really withstand the winter. As much as we would say, okay, let's find one that can withstand up to the winter, it's probably not one that's highly preferred forage. So you got to find one that kind of fits. Hopefully you need to devote your time to either saying, okay, I want this one for food and this one for cover. One that I like, if it's a marshy area, for withstanding the elements, would be swamp rose mallow. It stands up really well almost year round. Giant ragweed would be another one that stands up pretty good because it has such a dense stalk. But those are just a couple that come to mind.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Kip, do you want to take the next one?
Sure, sounds good. And a guy has a property that's been mowed regularly for years, Adam, and it's kept about 6 inches in height. So he's asking, should he let these areas grow up and inventory the species that grow? And what's the easiest way to inventory them? So he's keeping it mowed 6 inches high. Should he let this grow in inventory? Yes or no? And then after that, what's the easiest way to inventory?
Absolutely. So quick answer would be stop the mowing, let it grow up, see what plants are there. The app I love most for IDing plants, if I don't know them, is iNaturalist. It's just a smartphone app. It's free. Take a few pictures of the plant and start cataloging all the plants that are there. It's going to be pretty quick. It's going to be easy to see which ones are dominating the areas and which ones aren't. So go with the ones, start trying to ID the ones that are most common, figure out if they're good, bad, native, non-native, invasive, not invasive. And then if they are, get rid of them and try to promote the native ones.
Very good. I got one for you, Adam. Spraying brome grass. It said on the screen, April or earlier. Gentleman lives in Michigan. Is it too late, basically?
It may not be too late in Michigan. You got to kind of look around and see what the landscape looks like. Those cool season grasses tend to green up quicker than all the other plants. So if you're seeing road ditches, because it seems like most road ditches are some sort of non-native cool season grass in the Midwest and North, you may not be too late. I would just try to identify any broadleaves that are growing. What's the goldenrod? What stage is it at? And it might not be too late. And once again, collateral damage, I don't want a ton of it, but if there's just a few other ones hitting it or growing, I would probably go ahead and spray it, because I'm another whole year behind the 8 ball on getting it turned around to a highly diverse old field.
All right, Kip, you want to do one more, and then we're going to move on to the next section.
Sounds good. All right. You get another old field question. It's an old pasture. It's overgrazed, Adam. Sat undisturbed for several years. Now the creeping dewberry is beginning to get a bit crazy. So his question is, do you control the dewberry first, or go ahead and take care of the cool season grasses first? Because his interest is, let's get this into some early successional vegetation, forbs and that. So dewberry first or cool season grass first? What's your advice?
I'm sorry, where did he say he was from?
It doesn't say.
Okay, I'm just going to assume that he's already passed the window of controlling the cool season grass. So you've got 2 windows of time. You've got early spring or late summer, early fall, whenever that frost hits. You can't spray before the frost or you'll kill a lot of natives. You got to wait till a couple of frosts. So I would say control the dewberry this summer, this growing season, and then this fall or next spring, go back and control the cool season grass.
Thanks, Adam. For folks that need to get a hold of you, would like to get a hold of you, how do they find Land and Legacy?
You can check us out on social media. That's Land and Legacy, the and sign. We're on Facebook and Instagram. We're also on YouTube. Or shoot us an email at info@landandlegacy.tv.
Perfect. Matt and Adam have been a wealth of information. There's questions here, folks. If you have questions for them, please reach out. We've done a lot with these 2 gentlemen, as we mentioned at the beginning. We have a class coming up in Northern Missouri next month, where we're hosting a 1.5-day workshop with these guys on one of their clients' properties. If you're free, it's June 11th and 12th. I encourage you to sign up. There's actually still room. Come and hang out and learn a lot about habitat management. We're going to talk about old fields. And they also have a podcast. You can follow them on a podcast. So thank you very much for your expertise, Adam. Bringing things up at the end, I got to give away the prize. Folks, if you're not a member of the National Deer Association, please join. You can do that for $35 a year. You could just hit the Join Us button on our website, or you could join through that Furminator raffle. My colleague Josh shared that on the chat feature. So just go to our Furminator raffle and join for $100, and you're in the running for a Furminator. Upcoming webinars. The next one will be June 14th, and some guy named Matt Ross is going to be talking about how to become a jawbone aging expert. It's going to be really good. I encourage you to join. So come on back, sign up, and I'll teach you how to age a jawbone. What else we got, Kip, besides giving away the prize? You got anything on your list?
Did you tell them where I was tonight, Matt? Go Lady Indians. Still got my coaching uniform on. Our varsity softball team kicked some tail tonight on senior night. So that was pretty cool. I need to go back and see the first half of this. Adam, for everybody's here, I'm huge fans of Adam and Matt. I'm glad I got to see the second half of it. Matt, I'm glad I got to see here at the end for this, and look forward to seeing who wins this cool prize.
We're glad you joined us, Kip. I wasn't sure if you're going to be able to make it, if it went into overtime or not. So, all right, folks. So for the prize giveaway in the chat feature, not the Q&A, in the chat, what I want you to do is type in the answer to this question, and the prize is going to be, I changed the prize. Adam referenced this book a couple times, so I got to give one away, is the Craig Harper Guide to Wildlife Food Plots and Early Successional Plants. You probably can't see it because of my screen, but the original copy of it, we have actually one left in our inventory. So we're going to give that out. So the first person that answers this correctly in, again, the chat, not the Q&A, I'm going to scroll, and I'm going to go a little unconventional this one. Who was the singer of Old Love Feels New? Going to stay a little bit off topic here. Let's see who the first person. Adam referenced a song, country song. I'm not seeing anybody type stuff in. Oh, Chris Young. Russell Mann typed in Chris Young, and that's the right answer. So Chris, email me at matt@deerassociation.com. That's actually with 2 T's. I was joking earlier when Nick said send all your hate mail to me. Matt, M-A-T-T @deerassociation.com, and we're going to send that book to you. Again, Adam, thank you so much. Matt, thank you so much. I know Matt's hanging out at the airport, and looking forward to getting this class underway with you guys. So everybody have a good night, and thanks for your support. Hope you enjoyed it.
See you, Matt.
See ya.